welcome back to Pastor Life Podcast. My name is Rhonda Blevins. I'm a Pinnacle Associate and the pastor of Chapel by the Sea in Clearwater Beach, Florida.
And I'm David Brown, pastor of the Welcome Table in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and I'm also a Pinnacle Associate and glad to be hosting this podcast with my friend Rhonda.
Well, here in Season 6 of Pastor Life Podcast, we have a very special guest presenter. His name is the Reverend Dr. David Brown, and he's leading us in a study, I would call it, I guess, of Holy Experiments, Strategy for Joining God's Mission in the World. David is uniquely talented and gifted and trained in this area. He actually teaches a class on, strategic thinking at Duke Divinity School. David, why don't you recap where we've been so far in this series?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of this content has come from that class that you mentioned, and really in the first couple weeks, what we've done is laid out kind of some background on strategic thinking and what does that look like in the church. Do we have particular end goals or purposes that maybe don't exist in the same way with strategic thinking in the business world? So what makes Christian strategic thinking actually Christian? And then in the second episode, we talked about some of the barriers or roadblocks to doing strategic thinking well. And how do the cognitive biases that we bring to the project, or how do the mental models and maps, maybe the things that we're really comfortable with and that have worked for 20, 30 years but might not work the way they used to, how do those kind of create a barrier to creative thinking? And so we talked a little bit about how to avoid those, or what are some processes we can put into place to move beyond them, or just see our context a little more clearly. So now I think over the next few weeks, we're going to move into some models and methodologies for actually putting this into practice in congregations.
Great. I have learned a lot from you so far, and I look forward to learning models and some tools, maybe put some more tools in my pastoral tool belt for strategic thinking and leading. And
actually, that brings up another good point, is that with this season of the podcast, we're also trying something a little bit new in that we're both video recording. And so this video of our conversation, if you're listening to it as a podcast, you can also view it on YouTube. And we're also putting together a toolkit. So a toolkit that will really help you take some of this content and put it into practice, whatever your ministry setting, or maybe just some other area of your life that needs some intentional and strategic thinking. So that toolkit will be something that's available as well through our Pastor Life website.
And David, I appreciate you putting that out to the world, kind of as a gift to other clergy out there. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been fun to be able to share this with you, and hopefully there's a wider audience, and that these tools can really make a difference in the lives of pastors, leaders, and churches. That's the hope, at least. Yeah.
Well, let's move into Session 3 of Season 6, Holy Experiments, Strategy for Joining God's Mission in the World, with the Reverend Dr. David Brown. So, David, you said we're moving into more exploring some models for strategic thinking and planning. So I wonder, what do you have for us today? Do you have a model for us to explore and learn about today?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, over the next 3 weeks, I think we'll look at, or in the next 3 sessions, we'll look at 3 different methodologies or models. And the first one today is called the Strategic Choice Cascade. So This is a series of questions that can help us to think more deeply and intentionally about some of the bigger questions, foundational questions about our organizations and missions. I think this will be a bigger picture tool. Next week, we'll talk about design thinking and some very specific tools that can be pulled out for, a single decision-making process or something on the fly with a leadership team. And then the third week, we'll talk about integrative thinking, which really is about a larger method, mindset kind of approach to particularly challenging problems where there doesn't seem to be a clear set of potential answers. So I think that's kind of where we're headed. And we'll start with this idea of the strategic choice cascade.
Okay. So in a cascade, I'm thinking, like there's a pyramid, maybe an inverted pyramid, or is there a visual you can put before me?
So maybe a cascade like a waterfall. I guess that's, when you think of a waterfall, that's technically a cascade, right? And the water kind of flows off and kind of down level to level.
Okay.
And so these 5 strategic questions, and all of this, the basic model for this comes from Roger Martin and A.G. Lafley, and we'll reference that in the notes if people want to read more deeply. But Martin and Lafley, they propose these 5 questions as a cascade. So they sort of spill over in a particular order, but as they spill over and inform one another, sometimes you work back up to the top and have to kind of spill back over again as new information comes forward. So there's sort of a direction, there's a movement to them, but you also have the opportunity to kind of cycle back as needed in the process. Okay, so that makes sense. So so you've got 5 questions. Why don't you kind of drop the first one on us? Yeah. So why don't I let me drop all 5 and then we'll come back to the first one.
Okay.
And that way people can hear them all and maybe they'll say, what in the world is that one about? And we'll circle back around to them. So the 5 strategic questions and the way that they flow into one another. The first is, what is our winning aspiration? So that's the level 1 question. What is our winning aspiration? The next question is, where will we play? The third question is, how will we win? The fourth question is, what capabilities do we need? And the fifth question is, what structures or systems need to be in place?
Yeah. Okay.
So,
all right. So the first question is, what is our winning aspiration? That's not language I'm used to in the church. I guess this is a business model, right? So
it is a business model.
What might that look like in a church?
Yeah, so I think with each of these questions, we're going to need to do a little bit of theological work, right? So we've got a really helpful model that doesn't come from the world of Christianity or church life, and we've got a helpful model that we want to then be able to sort of translate or put our theological frame on. So yeah, I think it's hard for us, or we don't tend to think about winning as our goal or objective in the church. And so to start with a question of what is our winning aspiration, I think can be a challenging question. So what I would suggest is maybe we think about substituting some word for winning. So what is our winning aspiration? Maybe it's what is our faithful aspiration? Or what do we, you could just use, what do we aspire to as a congregation? Actually, I really like that because the word aspire, has that root word, S-P-I-R, spire, spirit. That idea of, what does it look like when we're really living into the spirit of what God has called us to be in the world? So to me, I think for the church, with that first question, what is our winning aspiration? It might look more like, what is God calling us to do or be in the world? Or it might be, what does it look like to be a flourishing community of faith in our neighborhood? Or what does it look like to build the beloved community here on earth as it is in heaven?
Yeah. I love that language. Thank you, Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
I also think, what is this is not probably language I would use with the church, but among us pastors, what is the local expression of the Missio Dei?
Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah. The key for this is I think this ought to be a high-level question where you're thinking about what is the grandest mission to which God is calling us. So the winning aspiration, this ought to be something that truly is aspirational. It ought to be big, and it ought to require an awful lot to live into it. In other words, this should be a guiding question that could be there for quite a while. That the winning aspiration would be something that draws our congregation into the future, not just for next week or next year, but in the largest sense.
It could be, I'm thinking, a well-written vision statement, that the church is actually invested in. Is that connected to this?
Yeah, I think if there is a sort of, with each of these questions, there's not necessarily kind of a one-to-one of this is sort of a final product we might have. But I think with this one, the thought of a mission or vision statement, the way that Martin Lafley would talk about this is that, an aspiration is a statement or a vision about the ideal future. This is the guiding purpose of the whole enterprise. And so all of these other questions that cascade down from it, they're sort of built off of a winning aspiration. So they suggest some of the sort of the mission statements of some big companies out there, companies that everybody would know, and how they go beyond just, for instance, Starbucks. So Starbucks has a mission statement to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time. So a winning aspiration, a winning aspiration is more than just serve a good cup of coffee, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So for a church, somebody might say, well, our mission is to create disciples. Well, that's great. That's great. But what does that look like in a aspirational picture for your particular congregation? What's the particular thing, that God is inviting you when you are at your best, living into your identity and into the calling that God has for you? What does that mean? What does it look like?
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on to the second question, where will we play?
Yeah, where will we play? So in the business world, where will we play tends to mean who is our consumer segment? Who is our potential customer or client, right? Mm-hmm. And it's really important, I think, for a business to know who they are working for, who their product meets a need for. For the church, I think this invites us to consider, can we be all things to all people? And probably the answer is no. And so we have to start thinking about, what is our playing field? Who are the people that God has invited us to connect with? And that may be geographically, that may be with a particular heart for a sort of ministry or a sort of population. That may be based around some theological conviction that we have. I think the where to play question helps us to hone in on how we focus our time and energy and resources.
And I think since many churches have gone to live streaming, I think that's a really important question, because suddenly our services are being broadcast across the universe, and where's our focus to be? Is it across the universe, or is it the local body of Christ? My church is in Florida, and so we have a good many snowbirds, and so our playing field, if you will, increased. Not only could we minister with our snowbirds seasonally, but we can minister with them all year long now.
Right. And so if you define your playing field as the group of people who are both in town for part of the year and out of town for part of the year, it really can begin to help you shape, well, what are the intentional strategic steps that we need to take to make sure we are following through on ministry with those people? or maximizing the impact we can have in staying connected with them.
Okay, good. Number 3.
Yeah.
How will we know we've won?
Yeah, how will we win? Yeah, how will we win? So again, we've got that word showing up, and and that word is there. So the book that all of this comes from, the Strategic Choice Cascade, is a book called Playing to Win. And so the winning language is sort of core to Martin and Lafley. And again, for us, I think as churches, we've got to decide how do we negotiate that word. So how will we win for Martin and Lafley is basically, what are the concrete ways that we feel we can live into that winning aspiration? So we've got a winning aspiration that talks about, at the broadest, largest level, what is our reason for existence? What's our purpose in the world? And then we've got a where to play decision that helps us to sort of locate where we're going to engage in our winning aspiration. So now the how to win is the practical, what are the pieces of the puzzle? What are the things that we need to actually do in order to live into that winning aspiration? So maybe for churches here, we go back to kind of what does it look like to use our gifts and skills that we believe come from God, the identity that we have as a congregation. What does it look like to use that and to put a plan in place to move toward the winning aspiration, using the gift, skills, calling that God has for us?
Of course, the old metric for that, and we do have an episode on metrics if you're interested in that episode. I think that was last season or maybe 2 seasons ago with Eric Spivey. The buildings, bodies, and budgets, that's been the old metric.
Yeah.
And we've talked about a new metric. And I think Mark Tidsworth, maybe via Brian McLaren, I'm not sure where this came from, but I would love to give my congregation a 1-question survey maybe at the end of every year. By being a part of Chapel by the Sea, I've become a more loving version of myself. And to me, that's that's how we'll know we've won, if they say, yes, that's true.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that, with this step, and then, the next 2 questions in the cascade are very practical, on the ground, kind of systematic things. That's really where I think we get into, how do we measure, quote unquote, success? Or how do we measure whether we are living into our aspirations? So I think we begin that with the how will we win? This might be, how will we know we are being faithful? Maybe that's the question that the church would want to ask, or the congregation would want to ask, is how will we know we're being faithful to that larger aspiration? That thing that we believe at our core. We believe God has called us to this thing, and God will give us what we need to do the things God calls us to do. Well, so then what's our way? What are some pathways forward that will help us to make progress toward that winning aspiration? How will we know we're being faithful to the things God calls us to do?
Yeah, very good. All right, question number 4, what capability do we need?
Yeah, what capabilities do we need? And so this would be, once we've got an idea of, hey, this is what winning would look like. So a year from now, if we looked back at where we've come from, are we a better version of ourselves? So we kind of lay out some metrics for that. What are some of the pathways we might choose to spend our time and energy and talent on as a community? So what capabilities must we have? So we want to look at those winning strategies, or those faithfulness strategies, and say, do we already have some or all of the capabilities to make progress? If so, great. These are the things we need. We need a group of people with this skill. We need staff members who have the time to commit to this. We need programmatic pieces that engage our community. So these are the things that we need in order to move toward our aspirations. So the capability question is basically, if we have these abilities and these resources and we use them to our best potential, will they move us down the line toward our aspirations? If yes, then great. We've got a good sense of what the tools we have to move us down the road. If the answer is no, then we've got to think about, well, then what? Do we move back up the cascade and kind of reformat that aspiration and the answer to what is winning or where to play? Do we say, right now we can't really play in that online space? We really need to focus on, the people who are really right here in our neighborhood right now. And so maybe you need to go back and say, we don't have all the resources to do all the things. We need to narrow down our playing field, or we need to rethink what it means to win. Or we need to figure out what would it take to develop that capacity. What would we need to develop that capacity or capability to really pursue the things that we've laid out in the first few questions.
So just going back to that same example of, excuse me, moving into a hybrid church. So not only did we need to figure out live streaming for our worship services, but also a hybrid approach to Bible studies and board meetings. And
pastoral care.
The capabilities then, pastoral care, absolutely. So the capabilities then related to not only the equipment that you need in the sanctuary, but equipment in the boardroom for, having good hybrid meetings and studies.
And probably also human resources. Who is tracking along with the folks who are joining worship virtually and helping them to be as engaged as possible through that medium. Who is assisting with pastoral care and tracking along with people's needs when they're out of town, for the season.
Yeah.
So I think you've got a whole system of capabilities that just need to be assessed. Do we have the capability of doing this thing? And if not, then we need to either adjust the expectations on the front end, or we need to think about how to develop the capability to implement.
Yeah, love that. Great. Okay. Fifth question. What management system do we need?
Yeah, so this is honestly...
We just need a pastor. The pastor will do all of it.
Well, that's what I was going to say. You've basically taught this part of the segment, Rhonda, right? I think that's probably the approach that, I don't know if many churches take that approach. I think that's probably the way that we tend to think about this, right? We offload a lot of the work to the paid professionals. And maybe part of the paid professional's job is to give that work back to the congregation and to interpret that theologically for them, right? One of the challenges here is that sometimes the management systems that we have in place are relics of another era of church life. And so I think this is true in the business world as well. I think there's a constant need to reevaluate whether we're measuring the right things, whether the type of organizational structure we have in place is the most suitable or efficient for doing the work that we say we're trying to do. So I think really what this question is about alignment to me. This question of what are the systems or structures that we need. We need systems and structures that really foster, support, and nurture our progress toward the winning aspiration. So you kind of see how that first question cascades down to each of the steps. And so if our structures and systems are not helping us to have the capacity to put winning practices together in our playing field to meet the winning aspiration, they're all really kind of related to one another. And for churches, I think this is a particularly critical question in this, post-COVID era for the church, but also just in an era where many churches have seen numeric decline, and where we've also seen the people who are, maybe we have roughly the same number of people that we had 20 years ago that are participating in church life, but they're participating in a different way and at a different level. And so this question, I think, is critical for churches in that we need to bring our structures and systems into alignment with the reality of what our context and capabilities are in 2023.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just an example from my congregation again is we're evaluating whether we will stay in the playing field of trying to have a robust children's ministry. We've been kind of struggling along with a couple of 3 kids and investing a lot of resources, human resources into that. And do we need to stay in that playing field, right?
Yeah.
Or do we need to allocate those resources some other place? And so kind of jumping back up, right, to the second question.
Yeah.
Jumping back up to the
What's our
second
playing
question,
field?
and then coming back down to the what management system. Well, if we're not going to be in that playing field, then we don't need a director of children's ministry at my church.
Yeah.
We might need to do something else, but
You would
the management
organize your
system needs
staffing in a
to-
different way.
Yes, exactly, right.
Well, and I think one of the gifts of this cascade, this model, is circling back up to that top question. What is our winning aspiration? What does it look like to be faithful to what God has called us to do in the world? What's a picture of that? And I think the key is when we are further down the cascade and we're trying to make a difficult decision. I mean, I would imagine that's a difficult decision for a church to say,
Right.
Do we continue to play in the children's ministry, family ministry space where, everybody's always thinking, are we young enough? Do we have enough young people? How do we attract more young people? So it's a
Right.
difficult question to even ask. But if you situate that question within a clear picture of who we are and what God has called us to do, what is our winning aspiration, then that at least provides the context for a challenging conversation.
Mm-hmm. What I love about this cascade is it gives clarity to decision making.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. And I'm an idea person. I've got the ideas and other people kind of make the ideas happen. But I have too many ideas. You can't, there's no way we would want to do the ideas, right? All the ideas. But, just for my own personal use, I can kind of plop an idea into this cascade and say, okay, that's really not what we're supposed to be doing right now, Rhonda.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and imagine taking that from the level of, it would be great if just pastors received this as a tool for themselves, right? It seems like there are just easy ways that today or tomorrow you could pass something that you're dealing with right now through this lens. But then
just
imagine
how to spend our time.
Yeah. But then imagine taking that conversation and this strategic choice cascade, taking it to your leadership team or your deacons or your staff colleagues and saying, what if we use this as one tool for thinking about how we're spending our time and energy and resources, having a larger, more intentional conversation around that. The more people you pull into this conversation, I think the more alignment that a congregation will have in terms of its mission, purpose in the world, and then the practicality of how do we live that out.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great tool. And in the toolkit that it will be available online, will there be something about this in the toolkit that you're going to provide?
Yeah, so I think in the toolkit, what we'll have there is, references, obviously, to some of the people and ideas that we talk about, giving credit where credit is due. Then we'll also have some further reflection, some places you can chase down more information, some links to outside resources, and then kind of a practical piece. As a pastor, as a church leader, what are some practical ways that I could put this into practice in my setting or context next week. And hopefully that will be a tool, a resource that can really make some of this theory, bring it down to the ground and make it applicable for people.
Yeah, great. Well, David, I think I've got a pretty good understanding, and I appreciate that. I think it is a great tool, and I look forward to trying it on my people.
There you go. Put it into practice.
That's right. All right. Anything else that you need to tell us about this or other holy experiments joining God's mission in the world, relevant material?
No, just that I hope that somebody that listens or watches this today will have at least one little practical piece that they can put into practice, and tune in to the next session when we get it up and rolling, and hopefully there'll be something else. We'll move on to a different method or model. We'll be looking at design thinking next time.
Design thinking. Great. Well, thank you so much, Reverend Dr. David Brown, for this great session. I've learned a lot.
And I guess we can point people to the Pinnacle website, and they can find more information about Pastor Life there. The Pinnacle website is pinlead.com, PINNLEAD.com, and you can link to Pastor Life there. And you can also find out all of the other sorts of services that we offer to support and encourage pastors and churches to join God on mission in the world.
And as always, thanks for joining us on this episode of Pastor Life Podcast. We're glad you took a break and now get back to joining God's mission in the world.
See you next time.